Today I'm sewing and sharing a woven tank that you can whip up in under an hour and with under a yard of fabric. I was looking for a simple pattern that I could match with my pocket skirt from my last sew along, and in my searching I found this beautiful Phoebe tank by fabricsstore.com. It's another one of their great free patterns. I've left a link for you below so that you could check out the details, grab a copy, and sew this along with me. My intention going into this project was to create a tank that I could wear on its own or match with my pocket skirt to create a faux dress design. I'll show you how I changed the pattern just a tiny bit so that I could play with the stripes of my fabric. I hope you sew it along with me, grab that pattern, cut out your fabric, and let's get started. To adapt my pattern to play with the direction of the stripes, I'm going to cut my front and back pieces separately instead of cutting them on the fold as directed. I'm going to use my ruler to add 3/8 of an inch seam allowance beyond this edge of the pattern piece. Then I'm going to cut this entire piece as usual. The only change is this additional seam allowance at the center front. Then I'm going to take the front piece that I just cut out, place it right sides together with my fabric, with my stripes going in the opposite direction. And then I'm just going to cut around that pattern piece to get the other half of my front bodice. Now that I have both of my front bodice pieces, I'm going to follow the same exact steps to cut my back bodice pieces from my back bodice pattern. And now I'm ready to sew the separate pieces together to create complete front and back bodice pieces. Place your separate pieces right sides together and clip your center seam. Sew that seam with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and then serge your seam to finish. Follow the same steps to attach your two back bodice pieces. I've taken my front and back pieces to my ironing board and I've pressed the seam allowance to one side. To keep this seam laying nice and flat when I wear it, I'm going to sew from the top to the bottom 1/8 of an inch away from my original stitching line, just top stitching this seam to the blouse. And do this for your front and back pieces. Now I'm going to lay my front and back pieces right sides together and pin my side seams and shoulder seams. And then go to your machine and sew both side seams and both shoulder seams with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and serge your seams to finish. I'm going to get ready to apply the binding to the armholes and the neckline. You can use store-bought bias tape, but I'm just going to cut my own out of self fabric. I'm going to use my ruler to cut 1 1/4 inch wide strips at a 45-degree angle to my fabric. I cut a couple yards worth, just guesstimating how much I would need for the armholes and the neckline. First, I'll apply my binding to the neckline. I folded back the raw edge of one of my strips of bias tape to the wrong side by about 3/8 of an inch. Now I'm going to align that folded edge with my center back and pin in place, right sides together. And then I'll continue pinning that strip all around the neckline. Now that I've clipped that bias tape all around the neckline and I'm back where I started, I'm going to allow the loose end of my bias tape to overlap the area that I started with at the center back by about 1/2 inch or so, and then cut off the excess that I don't need and pin that in place. Now I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and sew all around the neckline with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now that I'm done applying that binding around the neckline, I'm going to fold that bias tape to the inside of the garment right along the seam line. Tuck the raw edge of the bias tape underneath itself to the seam line and clip in place. Continue doing that all around the neckline. And now I'll take it back to my sewing machine and edge stitch all along the bottom fold of this binding on the inside all the way around for a nice clean finish. My neckline binding is complete and I'm ready to bind my armholes. We're going to bind both armholes in the same exact way as we did for the neckline, starting by folding one edge of your bias tape to the wrong side by 3/8 of an inch. And then you can place that folded edge of your binding right sides together with your armhole at the underarm seam and pin in place. Continue pinning that binding all around the armhole, sew all the way around with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, flip to the inside, and edge stitch all the way around, just as we did for the neckline. And the very last step is to hem the bottom of our blouse. The instructions say to press the raw edge of your garment to the wrong side by 3/8 of an inch and then an additional 1/2 inch all the way around. But I'm just going to do a rolled hem, taking it to my machine, folding it to the wrong side by 3/8 of an inch, and then rolling that 3/8 over on itself and edge stitching close to this upper fold all the way around the garment. Give everything a good press and you are all done with your tank. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you check out my other videos for more great sewing inspiration, and I'll see you in the next video.